Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is our very last edition of this webinar series, From One Coast to the Others, Canada's Regions Speak Up on Climate. This has been a program of presentations given monthly by climate activists, mostly climate reality leaders across Canada, to share stories about local impacts, stories, and solutions to hopefully inspire people across the country with some creative solutions. So I'm going to present our speaker for tonight. We are very privileged to have William with us. He lives on in Chief Dirigis territory in Yellowknife, where he witnesses the climate emergency on a daily basis. You know, whether it's thawing permafrost, higher precipitations leading to building collapse, thinner ice shelves, erratic fish population, and more. He's a building engineer and an advocate and campaigner for the climate. He specializes in green buildings and decarbonization of the building sector. And he likes working at the intersection of design, engineering, climate, advocacy, sustainability, and research. So without any further ado, I will pass the mic to William. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to hear your presentation.
Thanks so much, Emily. Merci de m'avoir. I think it's really nice to hear voices everywhere in the country, and I'm so glad for Climate Reality's work on, bringing up those voices. So I'll be sharing my screen, and if people in the audience and on Facebook want to share where they're located, that'd be really nice so that we get an idea of who is where. Oops, I'm going to share the sound as well. So Emily, I know you're in Longueuil. Imogene is in Montreal. How about for those who don't know, Northwest Territories is the big chunk of land just north of Alberta and Saskatchewan. We're bigger than Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland combined. So it's a really, really large area, but there's not a lot of people here. I'm just gonna start a timer to make sure that I'm not speaking too long. So I'm here to talk about so I'm originally from Montreal. I've been living in Northwest Territories on Chief Dirigis territory for 5 years. And I'm here to share some Northern perspectives as well as how witnessing the climate crisis makes me feel and how I transform this anxiety into action. I am just gonna expect that Emily will give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if we're having some audio or video issues, but I'll keep going here. So I was really excited for this talk because I was given really simple instructions. It was basically, must we change? Can we change? Will we change? And that's how I frame my talk. So I'm going to start with must we change? And I think it's going to be pretty self-evident. So I'm going to start with
the view from above tells the story. Blocks of ice on Jean Marie River's dirt roads. Days ago, they were under as much as 2 meters of water. Nearly all of the tiny community's 26 homes have been damaged.
It ruined everything. Everything was flipped over. When we went in there, the fridge was flipped, the deep freezer, like all the kids' beds, our bed, the dressers and TVs, and like everything was soaked and ruined.
The high water uprooted fuel tanks, contaminating the area. Even the school and band office were flooded. A tense time for Carla Norwegian, her partner, and their 3 children.
Sit down, babies. Sit down. So we grabbed the kids and we made it to the access road. And there was a line of trucks. I think there was our truck and a truck behind us that made it out before it got too deep.
With no power in Jean Marie River, the family left for Fort Providence, an hour away. Most of the community.
So this is just an excerpt from the National. This was this summer in Jean Marie River as well as other communities in the Decho and in the South Slave in Northwest Territories. So this is obviously costing a lot of money and displacing a lot of lives, and just uplifting a lot of having to move just if you could, like in the next community for a couple months while this is all resettling is really, really annoying and frustrating. So we've seen floods. We've also seen a lot of increase in precipitation. So climate change and global heating is not just about increasing in temperature. The increase in temperature actually brings modifications in the weather system. So we saw more snow in Inuvik, which is really, really high up in the Arctic. And the building, the high school, was not designed for that kind of snow load. So the school collapsed just 40 minutes before kids came into class. So obviously, like this is a major structural problem. And our buildings are not designed for that. So we're really like reviewing all our building code. In 2014, we had the largest wildfire event ever recorded in the last 30 years. There was 3.5 million hectares of forest that burned, and this is a short clip from that summer. So the air quality recorded in Yellowknife was the worst air quality ever recorded anywhere on the planet at the time.
My whole family was affected from the summer of 2014, summer of smoke, in all areas of our life, right down to our health, our mental health, our diet, and our spirituality.
It got really dark and we was cooking here and the light got really dim. I used a flashlight, it was in the afternoon. Everybody got scared, what's going on. Nobody was paying attention until it started getting pink, oh, looking at it, oh, it's red.
If this is happening to the air, what are we breathing in if the air is going so pink?
There's a lot of smoke. Even if you close your windows and close them really tight, somehow the smoke still seeped into the house. While you're breathing in it every day, like you're breathing in that heavy smoke. And some people were getting sick, like you get colds and things like that.
They had water bombers everywhere just flying over. It's they kind of hit hard too when they told us it was time to evacuate. I knew then that it was serious.
You can't sleep because of the, in case the fire comes while everybody's sleeping.
I couldn't imagine what it would be like for my mom or even my dad, because my dad has a pacemaker and my mom is allergic to smoke. There's no escape from it. You open your door, it's right there. You open your curtain, your window, it's right there. You have to keep everything shut.
So you get a sense that, I think it was really, really anxiety-inducing for people living in Northwest Territories. People still refer to it as the summer of smoke, or the summer of the apocalypse. And so in this summer of 2014, there was twice as many admissions to the emergency room at the Svensson Hospital in Yellowknife for asthma-related problems. So climate change in Canada is causing health impacts, and people are really affected. Permafrost. So permafrost is ground that stays frozen for 2 years or more, and all our infrastructure is built on it, right? So buildings, highways, roads is all built on permafrost. And what happens when it gets warmer, then permafrost thaws, and then the highways and the airstrips kind of go wonky. So this increases our maintenance costs by quite a bit. Same for buildings. So buildings are built on permafrost, and a lot of buildings are shifting and cracking, especially when they are on discontinuous permafrost or permanent permafrost that is more likely to thaw because of the increase in temperature, obviously. This is about coastal erosion.
Across the Arctic, researchers from around the world are monitoring Canada's northern coast, as well as parts of Alaska and Russia, where the shorelines are crumbling. The areas in red are where the fastest erosion is happening. They're losing up to 10 meters a year, which is why what's taking place on Peli is so extreme.
Obviously, there's a bunch of climate-driven factors, whether it's warmer air temperature, warmer seawater, more storms. These kind of things are affecting the entire region.
The erosion taking place here may be the most dramatic in Canada, but it's happening all along coastlines, and it's having a severe impact on some communities. 100 kilometers to the south is the Hamlet of Taktayaktuk, a community now threatened by the coast it's perched on.
You can see big cracks in the ground here where the ground is shifting and thawing, and this area.
So you get a sense again that, this is going to cost a lot of money. The community of Taktayaktuk has to be moved, and they've been trying to deal with thawing permafrost for a number of years. Of course, global heating also brings complications with our transportation system. So we use a lot of ice roads to bring food, fuel, and building materials to communities in the winter, because that's much cheaper than building roads or flying planes. And in some places, the hydrology, we don't really understand it properly. And in some places, the currents are changing, and then it leads to reduced ice thickness. So we've seen a bunch of trucks fall through the ice. This is a diesel truck in close to Delaney that fell through the ice as well. So obviously, big cleanup costs and remediation costs. So a lot of people are asking, is this a new normal? No, it's not a new normal, because even if we stop emitting greenhouse gases overnight, so if tomorrow we're not emitting any greenhouse gases, the gases in the atmosphere will stay there and will continue increasing the temperature for a few decades. So that just speaks to the urgency of the situation. So must we change? I think, yes, we must change. Can we change? I'm sharing with you some local projects that I find really inspiring, but also some other projects from other northern locations, because I think northerners are really, it's easier to appeal to northerners with other northern solutions, because oftentimes, the difference between the north and the south being like Ottawa, Montreal, Calgary, is really stark. And so I think we need to look at other northern locations. So first, what kind of change do we need, right? We know that we need to first eliminate greenhouse gas emissions if we want to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. However, we're not eliminating those quickly enough. And so I'm pretty sure we'll end up having to scale up negative emission technology. So basically take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it somewhere where it won't have a negative impact. So this is depicted here. Basically, here is our baseline for zero greenhouse gas emissions. And then we're going to have to do a lot of carbon removal if we want to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. And the 1.5 figure is quite important here, because it's really the difference between water and ice in a lot of locations. And for some islands, it really just means complete disappearance of islands underwater. So we also know that in the north, in northern communities, global warming is actually usually 2 to 3 times as high. So whereas globally so far we've warmed up by maybe 1.1, 1.2 degrees Celsius, in Yellowknife we've warmed up by 2.4 degrees Celsius, I believe, and in Inuvik, Taktayaktuk, it's 3 point something. So by 2050, I will not be surprised if we hit 6 degrees, 8 degrees Celsius in Northwest Territories. A really inspiring project is the Taitanini National Park Reserve that was created last year by some federal investment, and it's led by the Indigenous community of Shutsukay. And basically, it's an area as big as, or bigger, I believe, than Belgium. And so it's an area protected from any kind of development. And there's a lot of projects for Indigenous protected conserved areas, as well as land guardian programs, basically Indigenous folks who have a lot of knowledge in terms of environmental observations, and they have been, hunting and fishing and living on the land and picking up berries and medicine on the land for so many years that they know exactly what the land looks like, and they can observe environmental changes better than, in my opinion, any kind of like Western scientist who comes with an academic degree versus an Indigenous person who's been living on this territory for decades, but also their ancestors have been living there for thousands of years. So I think they come with that knowledge. That's a really inspiring project to me. I want to point your attention also to the Indigenous Resistance Against Carbon report, came out last week. Very, very cool, because it's basically depicting the power that Indigenous people have on stalling or stopping fossil fuel development projects. But also this other report by my friend, Chloe Dragon-Smith. She's a Métis woman. She lives in Wood Buffalo National Park with her partner, who's Cree. And they live a traditional lifestyle there. And I think it's really inspiring to me, because it's not the climate action that white people have in mind. I think spending time on the land, getting to know the land, is, to me, a really developed level of climate action, because you're really observing changes on the land. This is from the Indigenous Resistance Carbon report. Indigenous resistors are fighting fossil fuel projects equivalent to 400 new coal-fired power plants. I think it's just like, we need to put Indigenous voices forward. This is my friend Rob. He's Cree, and he's been living on the land for, for as long as he's been alive, and his respect for animals is so high. And 5 years ago, I was like a hardcore vegan in Montreal, and now living in Northwest Territories, I understand that really, like, to me, like, a fur coat is more sustainable than a coat made from polyester, because polyester is coming from fossil fuels. And I know that for a lot of people, this shakes up a lot of feelings. So just food for thought. And this is Chloe, and I think they had some a goose here, and they're collecting the feathers for building insulation. This is quite fun. I saw this tweet last March. This was like when the pandemic was starting. The way boomers feel about coronavirus right now is how millennials feel about climate change all the time. I think there's a big disconnect between how millennials feel about climate change and how like older generations feel about climate change. I think it's really important to recognize how we feel, because this is how we can get out of paralysis or anxiety or sadness, depression about climate change, and really get into action. So that's what happened to me in 2019. I was feeling pretty sad about the climate crisis. That was a couple months after the 2018 IPCC report. That report basically said we need to slash emissions by half by 2030 and bring them down to zero by 2050. And I felt the weight of that task, right? Because it's just such quick and urgent reduction. And I've been working in that field for quite a while, and I know it's really hard to make change. So I decided to take a trip and find some inspiration that I could bring back to Northwest Territories. Because I think, looking at other places where they've done the cool stuff we want to do, then it makes it much easier to say, hey, we should also do this. So I went to Denmark, where I saw just like fields and fields of windmills. Sweden, taking a train to Sweden is also just like windmills on both sides of the train, from Skåne to Kiruna. There's like so much clean power there. It's really fun. This is a vehicle, a car share in Malmö, Sweden, covered in solar panels. I thought that was just like very picturesque. Then I got to Finland. This is a electric bus with a pantograph. So it basically just zaps the bus with electricity for a few minutes, and then the bus is ready to go again. I think they actually have one in Montreal too now. My slides are acting up here. SAS, which is the biggest airline in Scandinavia, they are actively putting biofuels in their fuel mix, and the government is actually also pressuring them to do that. So it's both business driven and driven by regulation. I think it's really important to let both regulations and the market solve climate change together. And I'll talk more about carbon pricing in a minute. so I'm doing a thesis right now at McGill on bioresource engineering and negative emissions for the Northwest Territories. And I'm exploring a lot this technology called pyrogenic carbon capture and storage. And so it's basically a fancy word to say that there's a way to produce energy that instead of releasing the carbon in the atmosphere as CO2, it produces some sort of charcoal. And that charcoal becomes a soil amendment for gardening, agriculture, forestry. You know, you can like supercharge forests with carbon so that they are more, they sequester more carbon. And it's a really emerging technology in Finland and Sweden, and I'm trying to bring this here. And I think it's just really inspiring to see those projects. So what happens in Sweden is that residents in Stockholm, they bring their yard clippings to this facility, and in exchange, they get a bag of biochar. And with the yard clippings, the city of Stockholm produces heat, and then that heat gets disseminated in the buildings through district energy systems. They have a lot of district energy systems in Scandinavia. So that makes for carbon negative energy. So, you know, it's not just slowing down or stopping climate change, it's actually reversing climate change, which I think we need to do with negative emissions. They're doing the same in Finland here. Sampo and Kim here were really nice. They toured me through the facility, and they're making a lot of money because carbon pricing is super high in Finland, Sweden, and Norway. So they're making money based on the fact that they're producing negative emissions. They're also producing carbon neutral concrete. They mix the charcoal with some concrete, and then it produces carbon neutral concrete. And concrete has accounts for 6% of greenhouse gas emissions in the world, and we use so much concrete. So if we could slash this 6% with carbon neutral concrete, I think this could be a game changer. I'm gonna skip the slide here really quickly. There's so much potential that is underexplored with, you can take some water here, with using nature, actually working with nature to slow down climate change and find solutions to our biggest problems. This is Kulturhuset, and in a community in northern Sweden. It's one of the tallest wood buildings in the world. And because it's a wood building, basically its carbon budget is negative. So you're starting and you're sequestering a bunch of carbon, right? Because wood is carbon. So if you put wood in a building, it's gonna stay there for maybe 100 years. And that wood won't, you know, be released in the atmosphere, provided that we're planting a forest or replanting the trees that we harvested. So I think it's really important to let the market create these new technologies, but put regulations so that we make sure that whatever they're saying is actually true and verified. These slides are not working, too bad. Great urban planning in Helsinki, Finland. I want to draw your attention to Melissa Lem. She's the president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and she is leading this initiative in Canada to say we can't, like, healthcare practitioners can prescribe nature walks, because there's evidence that spending time in nature is actually really good for your mental health and for your physical health. It reduces the stress levels. So I think it's really important that we plan our cities and our smaller communities so that nature is really accessible for everybody. Then I went to Norway and I did a thing super cool. I flew an electric plane, and there's some stories on my Instagram if you want to see the full thing, but it was really exciting because Norway is really leading into decarbonization. They have the highest sales in the world for electric vehicles. Their ferries are becoming electric, and they want to have the first electric. They want to be the first country to have entirely electric domestic air travel by 2040. So that was really fun. They toured me and that little guy here, 2 seats. It has a battery equivalent of a Nissan Leaf, which is like medium range electric car. And so it's totally possible to fly electric. And of course, there's a few like kinks to work out, but they're getting there. And honestly, flying an electric plane was really cool because there's no combustion noise, so it's really, really quiet. And that was a video, but it's not loading properly. So please just check out my Instagram for the full thing. And then it's just like electric vehicle plug-in for just your regular electric car. So I thought it was pretty cool. At the airport in Oslo, they pile up all the snow in the winter, and then they cover it with wood chips here. You see all the wood chips here. And then they have tubes at the bottom, and then that's how they air condition the airport so that people are not too hot in the airport. And this sign says "Fare for isbjørn," means watch out for polar bears. I think it's a joke. So, you know, it's just that kind of design that we could integrate more in our communities to reduce our energy consumption and our greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon pricing, I think, is a big one. We see here Norway has one of the highest carbon prices in the world, and followed by Sweden. And you might be aware that in July, the House of Commons and the Senate just passed a new law so that our price on carbon is going to increase. It's currently at $40 per ton, but it's going to go to $170 per ton. And that's really going to help, I think, in our decarbonization efforts. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. Sweden has showed that their GDP has increased and their CO2 emissions has decreased. There's some critiques that say, yes, but you might have displaced your carbon emissions to China or whatnot. But still they're showing a reduction in CO2 emissions. So I think it's just showing that, you know, it's possible to create more jobs and reduce emissions. A project I did 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, is the Northern Building Retrofit Economy. So we're saying if we retrofit buildings to eliminate fossil fuel consumption, we're also going to create jobs, and we're going to save money, and we're going to improve our health. So I think, you know, I was thinking we should look into completely decarbonizing all buildings and see how many jobs that's going to create. Turns out it creates 36 jobs, which it doesn't seem like a lot, but for a community of 45,000 people, it's kind of a lot. And we could save $20 million per year for, you know, for the rest of time, because then we're not using fossil fuels. So I think it's just, you know, we need to think more about these big initiatives and these big lofty goals and put them into action. This is a quick video from the Canada Green Building Council.
The debate is over. Canada's green building industry is creating healthier and more comfortable places to work, live, learn, and play. It's also creating opportunity. The green building industry today contributes about $48 billion to Canada's economy and directly employs almost twice as many full-time workers as the country's oil and gas extraction, mining, and forestry sectors combined. Now, as our governments consider how best to jumpstart the economy, this sector is ready to step up. A pandemic recovery plan centered on green buildings would ultimately employ close to 1.5 million Canadians. In fact, smart investments in the green building sector could help ensure Canada meets its 2030 climate target while adding almost $100 billion to the economy and improving public health. Make no mistake, these are hard times. But with the right investments, Canada's green building sector could put people to work and reboot the economy while helping tackle our climate challenge. Let's make Canada's pandemic recovery a green recovery, with healthy green buildings for everyone at the center of the plan. To find out how you can help, visit cagbc.org/greenrecovery.
I'm just giving my friends at the CAGBC free promo here. I think they're really doing good work, and you know, decarbonizing our buildings, which represent about 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions, will create more jobs. And we spend 90% of our time indoors, so might as well make it a place where it's livable and healthy, and we have good air quality, especially during COVID. So that's what we did with this report. Whereas in the past, other reports have looked at, for example, the Harper targets, but really we looked at complete decarbonization, and we showed that it would create jobs and save us money. This is a quick infographic about this, and I'm just going to skip that quickly. Okay, I looked at must we change, and I showed climate impacts that are happening in Yellowknife, in Northwest Territories today. And then I said, can we change? And I showed all these solutions that I think could apply to Northwest Territories and to the rest of Canada. But now, how do we change? And like, will we change? And that's a question I ask myself every night before I go to bed. What's the best way to make change? And change is really hard. There's so many books about change making and influencing. And I'm sharing here a few of my hot tips for undercover climate advocates. I used to think of myself as not a climate activist or not a climate advocate. I hated that term. But I think everybody can be. So I'm an engineer, and I have a day job, and I do engineering work, but still I think there's room to be advocating for decarbonization. So here I'm just going to give a few tips, and I'm mindful of time. So I think I have about 10 minutes left to max. So first of all, your feelings are valid. Whatever you're feeling about climate change or what you're seeing around you, COVID, Afghanistan, your feelings are valid, and the best way to shift into a productive or creative or abundant mindset is to recognize how you're feeling. I love this infographic from Queer Brown Vegan about the different emotions that are on the climate emotion scale. So I know for myself that I've experienced a lot of eco-anxiety in the past. I feel like these days I'm a lot in the eco-paralysis, eco-guilt, like when you're using plastic bags because you forgot your bag, or you're flying because you have to go somewhere, or I think we all have those. I've had a pretty big episode of grief in past years. And it's only by going through these episodes of emotions and processing them properly, maybe by yourself, with friends, or with a therapist, that I think you can have the biggest impact. So we know that, if you're stressed financially, if you make a budget and you look at your expenses, you're like, okay, I'll be fine, like as long as I respect my budget. So action alleviates anxiety, right? But same thing for climate. Climate action also alleviates eco-anxiety. So to me, the way I sleep at night is by doing climate work or speaking up about climate, because it reduces my anxiety about climate. We have to be mindful of how people feel when it comes to climate change. There's a lot of barriers before people can move or make change about the climate crisis. Sometimes it's because it's too far in distance, in time. It's too far, like it's happening in the Arctic, to polar bears only. So people kind of disconnect from that. People can also disconnect when it's like too much doom and gloom, and but then they get into a point where like they express some sort of cognitive dissonance. We see that a lot in politics, or outright denial, because oftentimes it's like people's identity, right? If you're an oil and gas worker, if your paycheck depends on you believing that oil is good, then it's way more likely that you're going to have denial of climate change. And we need to recognize that and not be mean, or not be, I think, we need to be gentle and kind with people, because I think everybody's doing their best. So question here, what's the thing that these three things have in common? Spotify, Skype, and oat milk. People can give answers in the chat if they want. Hello. I thought I was alone in the office. So Spotify, Skype, and oat milk are actually all Swedish inventions. And I did not know that, but I was quite surprised. And it makes sense because, so Sweden is one of the most innovative countries, actually second in the world according to visualcapitalist.com. And why is that? Well, Sweden put a price on carbon in 1991. Canada put a price on carbon in 2019. And the price of carbon in Sweden is currently at around $170 per ton, which is going to be our price in 2030. And it's no wonder that Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland are all producing these cool innovations because they are putting more regulations on the things we don't want to see. So that it incentivizes the things we want to see, like oat milk or Skype, Spotify. Something to keep in mind, because carbon pricing will ultimately increase innovation, increase economic development. I want to point your attention to Dr. Courtney Howard. She's one of my best friends, and her TED Talk is fabulous. So if you want to take a screenshot right now and then Google that later, I think she's one of the women who speaks the most clearly about climate and health. And she's had a tremendous influence on me and on tons of other people as well. So how do we make change? Simple messages repeated often by trusted voices are the most effective. So if you can bring in a doctor, a nurse, somebody who has recognitions amongst your peers and that can say, hey, we should make change and we should move forward about climate change. This is what I was saying about how Canadians understand that climate change is happening. However, they see it as a distant threat, either in time, like it's going to happen in 2100, I'll be dead by then, or in space, it's not just in the Arctic, it's also happening in Montreal with heat wave, or in species, like we will die and polar bears will die as well. But so it might be better to talk about health impacts rather than impacts on polar bears, because they're cute, but people don't really care. Honestly, people don't care. So that's the dominant mental frame for climate change. We need to shift that to health impacts. And the Canadian Medical Association is doing a really fantastic job at this. And we know that there's climate impacts everywhere on health in Canada today. So it's solastalgia, so this feeling of not being at home, or homesickness when you're still at home because of rapid environmental changes. That's happening in the Arctic. Of course, wildfire, asthma, floods, allergies, tick-borne disease, Lyme disease. I have a friend who had Lyme disease and it's really devastating. Heat waves, stress from relocation or from really intense events. So you might have noticed that I spent about 30% of this time talking about the bad stuff and 70% about the solutions. I think that's a balance we should strive to achieve, because if we overwhelm people with negative stuff, then it just gets really draining. And it's important to stay in a positive mindset when it comes to climate change to avoid the eco paralysis. So these are slides, by the way. The last couple slides are slides from Ed Maybach at the Center for Climate Communication at George Mason University. Fabulous guy. He's doing amazing research on how to communicate climate change. So in 10 words, it's real, it's us, experts agree, it's bad, there's hope, and I think we should abide by that and work with that. I encourage you to go check out his stuff. He's got a bunch of stuff online. I think he's got a book as well. Recently, I found this slide that I wanted to share as well. It's so useful to know if you're anybody who's like working in an organization and you're trying to make change. This is by a bunch of researchers at a university in Germany. It was published by Cambridge. Discourses of climate delay. So what do people say when they're not denying that climate change is happening, but they don't want to take action right now? So they're going to say, for example, well, what about China, right? Just as a way to say, well, we don't have to take action because China has such a big impact. So it's called whataboutism. Or when people say, well, we should just wait for new technologies to emerge and deploy them. So that's technological optimism. So I really encourage you to check out this because it helped me think about what do people say when they don't want to take action and how we can just switch that into taking action. Climate communication tips. It's better to say climate crisis, climate emergency rather than climate change. It's not natural gas, it's fossil gas. Let's reframe climate risks as climate impacts, because risks kind of suggest that it might not happen, but it is happening. We're not reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we're eliminating greenhouse gas emissions. And when people say green buildings are more sustainable, it's not more sustainable, it's sustainable or it's not. So to me, that's really helped me recognize when there's greenwashing. And I use also global heating rather than global warming because it speaks to the urgency. our target in Canada, we're not there yet. We are headed towards 3 degrees Celsius based on the commitments we did. So I think we should double our commitments at the very least. There's a ton of evidence online that we should do that. I said that there's no such thing as more sustainable. It's sustainable or it's not. We don't want to reduce emissions. We want to eliminate them. And that's a mindset that even I have a hard time getting into, because we've been trying to reduce emissions since the 80s, but really we want to eliminate them. So that's the mindset I'm trying to put in. I love when people tell me that I'm passionate about climate change. I'm not. I'm concerned. And sometimes it's easy for people to dismiss you or to say, oh, you're so passionate, or that's your thing. No, it's just I'm concerned. And so don't let people dismiss you or patronize you, and just speak truth. This great article here from gris.org. Oftentimes we are tempted to dumb down our climate messaging for other people to understand because there's so much lingo, but I don't think it's about dumbing it down. It's about smartening up. And I thought that was a really interesting read. Again, maybe try to use different words that will speak to more people, because when it's too words that are too complicated, like climate mitigation, a lot of people don't know what it is and they're too shy to ask. So they either push back or disengage. So I think using simple words like eliminate emissions, I think people are more likely to understand that. And it's not about thinking other people are dumb. It's just people have their lives and they're busy. And then the best way to engage them is to use simpler words. This is time to take a screenshot. These are a few of the books or podcasts that I've read or that I'm reading right now that I think that have changed my mind a lot. And I encourage you to have a look at them as well. I think I sent Braiding Sweetgrass to my sister, who's on this call, I believe. And I think it's really important to have fun. Because if it's not fun, if your climate advocacy, your climate activism, or whatever you do is not fun, then you will burn out and you won't want to do it. So I encourage you to rethink, what are the things that bring you a lot of joy, to use Marie Kondo's motto, and what are the things that give you anxiety or that you're not comfortable with, and explore those and then see if you can shift or change them. And Emilie, I hope that I'm not speaking over time here. My timer says 39 minutes, 41 seconds. So I'll conclude here, and I thank very much Climate Reality Project for bringing me here. Wow, William, that was incredible and right on time as well. I am thoroughly impressed. You are fine. Thank you so much. That was incredibly interesting, and you brought perspectives that we have not had at all on this series yet. So I'm very, very grateful for that. I have to say it was actually such a treat to get your tips on climate communication too at the end. I was not expecting that, and that was really, really a nice treat. The climate delay that you spoke about, the whataboutism, I really like that. I was there taking a bunch of screenshots. I have a lot of screenshots of your presentation. This is not my work, but I think it's really important to share it because I think it's a really good work. Oh yeah, I agree. And I really, I do a lot of work with climate communication, and I really enjoyed the part about wording tips, right? For example, eliminating, not reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that you're concerned, you're not passionate, you're concerned. I thought that was just so brilliant and things that we can all learn from. I'd like to open it up to questions now. We still have 15 minutes with William. So I would love to open up the floor for any questions you might have for him. You can either use the Q&A function or drop your questions directly in the chat. And I have a few questions of my own as well, but I want to let the public ask theirs first. So I'll give you all a few seconds to maybe think and type your questions for William. Or maybe what I can do is throw one at you while folks type. How does that sound? Yes, I'm ready. Oh, wait, can I share, while people are writing questions, can I share my t-shirt? Yes, so please do. By all means. I printed this t-shirt that I'm trying to open up here. And I put a shirt on because it was cold when I biked up the hill. Oh no, I'm breaking up. So I printed this. Oops. This is from showyourstripes.info. So it's a website. You pick it, you input your location, and then it spits out a graph of temperature increase. So this is temperature change in Northwest Territories from the 1900s to today. And we're seeing a big spike in the last couple of decades. So I thought it was just interesting to put this t-shirt on for the occasion.
I love it. I love it. I need to get a t-shirt like that made as well. It'll help me navigate conversations with my father at dinner time. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I'm going to throw a question at you, William. So, having lived, so I skipped a few parts of your biography, but I know that you lived in Montreal in the area, and then you moved out to Yellowknife. So having lived, in the Montreal area and then moving to a less densely populated region, I was wondering if there's any insights that you can share on the differences that you've observed in terms of climate advocacy and grassroots organizing.
Yeah, so my biggest insight was when I moved from Montreal to Yellowknife, because in Montreal, I was aware of climate change. I was working towards climate change. I was studying it actively, but it wasn't, it didn't have the weight it has in me right now. When I moved to Yellowknife, I was like, oh, it's happening right now, today. And so it moved from being something important to being something urgent. So now it's like every day I wake up and I say, what's the one thing I could do right now that's going to have the best, the biggest impact on climate policy in Canada or in the world? And so that really has shifted my mindset. And in a big city, I thought I was a big city guy, but in a big city, I find it harder to connect with people sometimes because we don't know our neighbors as much, or like we don't recognize the people. But I cannot walk into the bar here and be anonymous because I know somebody for sure, and I'm going to have a conversation. So I find that change making in a small community is actually like a continuous job, because you're always stumbling upon people and you're building community this way. And I find it harder to build community in big cities. I think it's actually easier to build a community via internet or web-based in big cities, whereas in small communities, like, I think the most inspiring conversations I've had was over dinner with folks face to face, and where we decide that sometimes it can feel lonely to be a climate activist, because everything is like working against you sometimes. So finding your people that will provide you confirmation on a daily basis that you're not stupid, you're not crazy, you're not passionate, you're just concerned, and it's okay to do good work. And sometimes I text my friend Courtney and I'm like, yo, this happened, I'm just feeling awkward. And yesterday I said that to her and she just replied, keep pushing. And I was like, yes, thank you. So I think it's really, really important to, wherever you live, find your community, and don't hesitate asking them for input and support.
Words of wisdom. You heard it here first, folks.
Yep.
Such good advice, William. I'm going to read out a question from Clarence, who says, thank you, William. I'm taking a class on geomaterials that mainly focuses on concrete. Your point about zero carbon concrete caught my attention. I haven't heard about it before. I didn't know either that it was responsible for a big part of CO2 emissions. Thank you. What did you say it was made out of? Now, do you remember that? Or do you have to sit through your notes, William?
No, I do remember that. So that was a block of, and I can maybe go back. That was a block of concrete that was mixed. So concrete usually has cement and some sort of aggregate, right? So in that case, the aggregate was mixed with some biochar, which is a charcoal basically, and biochar is pure carbon. So what happens when you put pure carbon in concrete? It's going to stay there, right? And like stay as concrete for years and years to come. So you could look at carbon cure Carbon Cure is another company that is into carbon neutral or even carbon negative concrete. I think it's all about, there's a lot of like greenwashing of concrete these days, but you could look at the life cycle analysis and make sure that there's a proper carbon neutrality or like a proper label that shows that the concrete is actually greener. I don't think you can't buy that like at Rona or Home Depot or Lowe's, and it's not commercially available in Canada just yet. I don't think so at a large scale at last, but it's coming for sure.
Cool, thank you. You know, you gave such good good tips on community organizing and communication that I forgot for a second there that I'm speaking to an engineer here. Chris would like to know, what is greenwashing?
Oh, I love greenwashing. It's just so obvious when you know what it is. So it's hard to see at first, but greenwashing is like, what's a really good example? All right, I'm getting a lot of ads these days. I just bought a house last week, and I've been doing some online shopping about my new place, and I'm getting a lot of ads about dishwasher tabs. And that ad said something like, be a half-load hero. Start your dishwasher when it's half full because you're going to be energy and water saver hero, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, all right. And so they're arguing that washing dishes manually is so bad for the environment versus using a dishwasher. And there's just so many counter argument in that. It depends on how dirty your dishes are, blah, blah, blah. So greenwashing is just like putting a green coat or like saying something is actually green or more sustainable when actually there's not that much evidence, right? So other examples, they don't come to my mind right now, but anybody could help me.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with cleaning products often, but I mean, it's applicable to so many things.
Yeah, or it could be, for example, the Liberal government saying, we're going to build a pipeline and we're going to plant 2 million trees. That's greenwashing because the pipeline is going to produce way more carbon emissions than the trees, and we don't need the revenues from the pipeline to transition into the low carbon economy. So that's greenwashing. There's also pink washing, about like women or there's a bunch.
Yeah, and Clarence said in the chat here, shirts with green messages like "Save the planet," but the shirts are made unsustainably by exploiting people, etc. That's a good example.
Exactly.
I would like to ask you before we wrap up one last question. So William, you spoke about amplifying Indigenous voices, and I think people are increasingly appreciating the importance of being strong allies to BIPOC voices. And I'm wondering, now that you've moved to Yellowknife and you're more closely connected with some Indigenous communities and you've made some friends, what does that mean to you concretely, being a strong ally? What are the do's and don'ts? And do you have any recommendations stemming from your experience?
Oh, that's a good question. So first of all, there are no self-declared allies. I've seen on Twitter like, oh, Indigenous ally, whatever. No, that's not a thing. I think even like it's about questioning yourself every day, and the levels of colonization that we live in is just every day I unwrap a new layer and I'm like, oh, okay, I did not notice that part. Like the fact that, look at where the power is held, who holds the power, who holds the money. That's a big part. And I think the best way to be an ally to Indigenous folks is to actively seek Indigenous input, Indigenous friendships, and value their time. And I know that I work in an organization where on my floor, there are 0 Indigenous staff, yet more than half of the population in this territory is Indigenous. So I'm very, very mindful of that and continually, actively bringing in Indigenous voices as much as you can, keeping in mind also that they are, the folks I know who are Indigenous and who are working on climate, they are overloaded and are continually being asked to be on boards or on talks, or so I think it's using the time you have to lift those voices and whenever possible, kind of like direct power or money at them and work with them.
That's incredibly helpful. Thank
and
you.
Also, last thing, like you will not be a great ally if you are like, you will make mistakes for sure. You will make mistakes, and that's like inevitable. And you got to step on your ego and say, I made a mistake here. I did not know this. And you'll learn. That's the only way you'll learn.
Thank you, William. Great. Well, I have a few final slides that I need to present.
Yes.
But before I do that, I want to say thank you again so much. This is such an incredibly enriching talk. Very, very grateful for you taking the time tonight.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Emily. Merci, ciao.
Merci. Okay, so I will keep you all around for a few more minutes to give you some ideas on how to get involved. And the Climate Reality Project has several options for you. So first of all, our mission as an organization is to build and connect networks of empowered individuals and communities across Canada, as you know, by equipping them with the tools and knowledge to bring about new behaviors and policies that lead to a low carbon, resilient, and just future. So if you're a climate reality leader, you're already doing this by performing acts of leadership. If you would like to become a climate reality leader, there is a training coming up very shortly. Applications are currently being accepted. Trainings are free. They are currently online. And so I encourage you to go to climatereality.org to apply. Deadline is coming up soon though, so don't waste any time if you want to apply. You can also request a climate reality presentation. We also have the Community Climate Hub initiative that you're welcome to participate in. You do not need to be a trained climate reality leader to participate in the Climate Hub initiative. It's really a network of citizen-led groups that push for carbon neutrality at the municipal level. And the National Climate League is right now in the data collection phase. So if you would like to help us collect some data and be part of this annual exercise in participative democracy, then this initiative is for you. And if you're a student, make sure you look into the Campus Core initiative to decarbonize your campuses. So that is it for me. Thank you so much again, William. This was a real treat. And thank you everyone for attending. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much, Emily. Keep up the good work.
You
Good
too.
night. We'll see you soon.
Good night.
Bye-bye.